the children you're working with. And depending on other things that are impacting development, that will help families make those choices as well. This is an ideal goal. It's not necessarily available to everybody, and we have to be adaptable, but it's great to understand these strategies, even if you pull from these strategies for each. Okay, so there are you have to use with kids, and that's so thank you for pointing that out. Team, you all know that order from we always put the child and parent, which is all sometimes hard to do. It's their child, their choice, what they want, and then we all support the family, the education, there are other professionals, doctors, therapists, psychologists. We all work together as a team and collaborate, always keeping in mind to empower the parent to make their choices for their children. Next slide. We talked about this, we always start with the family outcome. That will help us. Okay? And again, that most children are born to families with typical hearing. We're aware of that. That also would help us in our decision making for their communication modality. And as Edric pointed out, parents do have the right to understand all the options, and for us as the first interventionist with families to help them understand the options and the implications of the options, and not just different. You may okay. So in terms of family desired outcome, thanks, Elizabeth. What can I do for you now? About your child. Your child. 3 months, 6 months, a year, 10 years. And I find when you're dealing with parents right at the beginning, always finding a positive way. They need to hear something positive and about them and about their child. Remember that at the beginning, we're struggling with parents that are going through grief. And so we're always highly aware of that, and we're highly aware that parents need hope. We need to know there will be a hope. So always try to find a positive. And as I mentioned before, when I showed the video of Noah, very important to understand that there are tons of variables that affect the progress. That starts with, their age of diagnosis, their degree of hearing loss, the cause of the hearing loss, the effectiveness of their amplification, the effectiveness of their audiological management, their hearing potential. The best of what we do may not be good enough if they don't have that potential. And I've had some kids with cochlear implants that after all work, a year and a half later, there are some kids for whom it doesn't work. You just have to be aware of the health of the child, emotional state of the family, level of participation, therapists, parents and caregivers, and of course the child's intelligence and learning style. He was highly intelligent. Later on, he had gifted testing. He tested just below the cusp for gifted. I would bet that if he didn't have the hearing loss, he probably would have tested gifted. But that all impacts how the kids do. So it's nice to get families together, but I always warn them not to compare, that there are differences, and all these variables are significant in terms of the progress. So there are 10 principles of listening and spoken language that are just important to be aware of. And again, you can see that in these presentations, it all comes together. With repetition, it all overlaps. The most important principle is early diagnosis of hearing loss in newborns and infants, and toddlers and young children, followed by aggressive audiological management and auditory verbal therapy. So again, ensuring that they're diagnosed, wearing hearing aids during all working hours, and getting the appropriate therapy. Principle. Second principle. Immediate assessment and use of appropriate hearing technology to obtain maximum benefit for auditory input. I call that aggressive. When I teach my families, it's not okay to just put the equipment on and go. Especially with cochlear implants, you're dealing with technical that on children, things go wrong. You have to always be watching, always be assessing, ensuring if your car doesn't have gas, run. If your child's ability to as so ensuring it's a good working order. Principle number 3. In most of the principles therapy, it's guiding and coaching the parents. You have to remember in auditory verbal therapy, it's the parents. We're teaching the parents. When we have a session, it looks like we're doing therapy, but the end goal is always teaching the parents. So guiding and coaching the parents to help their child use hearing as the primary sense for language during all waking hours. It doesn't mean you can't audition. It doesn't mean, Edward was saying to me, facial expressions are so important. It's really important. Auditory verbal does not mean the complete taking away all auditory access to vision. Vision is still very important. It means we train and we lift weights with the time, but we don't stop our normal typical development. There's still facial expressions. We'll get rid of all of that. Primary facility of their child's listening and spoken language. And this is achieved through consistent participation in individualized auditory verbal therapy. And I think that my biggest problem early on is parents they'll go to me, they'll find to do this, 7 different people. When I see that, when I realize aren't valuing, they're not realizing that they can do it, it means I'm not doing a good enough job in empowering them. Their children all the time, the best people to learn. So our job really is to plan sessions, but how do we plan it so that we, one of the things I learned is Warren Estabrooks used to always say, give the bucket to the parent. Give it to the parent, let the parent do it. And some videos I'll show this week is let the parents do it, to help parents understand, okay, Dana did this game, but what does that mean at home? Does it mean I want the parent to take my toy home and play it the way I did? No. So the most important thing that we can do is empower parents. Well, how do you integrate that at home? What do you do at home? What do you like to do? What are the routines in your house? And do you get dressed, go to work? Do they help with the chores of washing the dishes? What do we do to take our goals and to integrate it? If we can help parents do the therapy in their daily lives, the therapy will get done. If we expect the parents to sit down with their child 1 hour or 2 hours a day at a table and do therapy games, chances are they'll come next week back to you feeling guilty they didn't do it. They didn't have time. So we have to think in everybody's busy lives, what are some of the ways, can you think of what are some of the ways you can help parents integrate that language goals? Can you think of some activities? I'll give an example for starting. I like to do dressing. Every parent gets their child dressed in the morning. What better way to take it off? Put it out. Here's your head. So another activity at home.
Maybe preparing dinner for the family. You could be engaged with child in the kitchen. You talk about the things that you are using, the food that you're using, like let's cut the tomato, this orange, so this color red. So you could get a lot of vocabulary when you're teaching the child and you're making dinner for the family.
Everybody has to eat, everybody has to get dressed. What other routines at home? Any other routines at home? Setting the table. Showering. Sometimes you take technology off, but you can still do some of that before they get in. You talk about it when they come back out. So showering, bathing. Bedtime. Play. Anything else? Routines at home? Getting in the car, where they're going shopping, taking them shopping with you, what you put in the basket. So when I have my auditory goals, and Sandra's going to talk about all the different levels of language tomorrow and the next day, finding ways to help parents integrate that. If they can do that, much better chance of the goals being done at home. So principle number 6, guide and coaching parents to help their children integrate listening and spoken language into all aspects of life. So we just talked about that. And of course, helping teach parents in the therapy sessions how to play in a way that promotes auditory verbal interaction with their child. Principle 7, guide and coaching parents to use natural developmental patterns of audition, speech, language, cognition, and communication. And Sandra's going to be talking about that. She's going to be going through the Global Foundation for Children with Hearing Loss, the developmental curriculum, and ensuring that parents can understand that and helping them plug into what's the appropriate level for their child at that time. Principle number 8, guiding and coaching parents to help their child self-monitor their spoken language through listening. Can you quickly think of a way of how a child can monitor their own speech? One quick way in therapy or working with them, how can children learn how to monitor their own speech? I'll be talking about that on Wednesday in strategies. So really it's getting them to repeat, hear, always repeating, so that you're just not saying, they're also saying. And when they talk and they say it, they're hearing themselves. And it's called auditory feedback loop. So that's one of the principles that we want to help teach parents so that they can integrate that at home. Principle 8, that's 8. Principle 9, administer ongoing formal and informal diagnostic assessments. These help to develop individualized auditory verbal treatment plans and to monitor progress and the appropriateness of your programming for the family. So that's really important. Can I just ask quickly, I know we have about 2 minutes before lunch. People working with young children, what types of diagnostic assessment are you currently using? Natasha, what type of diagnostic assessment?
There's the PLS-5.
PLS-5, I use that
The
too.
auditory functioning, the auditory skills checklist.
Auditory skills checklist.
Flip.
Flip? Okay, so that's great. And I normally administer every 6 months or whatever the tests allow to make sure the child is making the appropriate progress and to helps parents understand where they're going and to help ensure we're programming at the right level and that what we're doing is appropriate for them. And their assessment will be talked about as well later in the week. Principle 10, aim for education in mainstream schools with peers with typical hearing and appropriate services from early childhood and onwards. And I think I was speaking with people last night. It sounds like most of your children are integrated into mainstream schools. Yes, is that the case? Do you have schools for the deaf? You do too. But is the majority of your children that you work with, are they in mainstream schools with hearing peers? That's really important because they're getting the language models. They can learn from their peers. Principle, that was principle 10? Okay. And I know that it also, in speaking with people last night, it sounds like there's not a lot of support in school. So that's a goal later on. That's the next step, more support in school. I know it's lunchtime. Any quick questions?
Yeah, mine is not much a question as to a comment. I think what we are here for is to become ambassadors of what technology can do. For a long time in this country, maybe we have not had the belief that children with deafness can listen and speak. So we want to convince the skeptical public that this can happen. And sometimes I feel like it is the professionals who are standing in the way of parents. I'm a parent of a child with a cochlear implant. And when I began to do this, it was the doctors who were telling me that that you have to wait until your child is 5 for you to take him to a deaf school for sign language. So I still believe that most parents, if they have the knowledge, will want to do it right. But we, the professionals, we directed them to an option that parents are not for. So when you go to a professional to ask for options for listening and spoken language, it is them who are trying to push to the parents the option of a total communication. But for us parents, when you go to a doctor or a speech therapist, you are telling them, how can my child speak the language that I do speak? So it is us now to go and say to the public that children with deafness, if fitted with technology at the right time, can listen and speak. I am proud with the work that most of the people, some of the people in this room have done for my boy, including Sarah, when she diagnosed the boy, and Natasha, who helped us to help him to speak and listen. And today, and I am an advocate of early intervention because my boy has gone to regular school. So I feel like if we share this information with as many parents and as many people in the public, then they can buy the idea of listening and spoken language only if they can see live examples of children who have benefited from this. Otherwise, we are still very skeptical as a public. Even the leaders in this country are still asking the question, why should I spend 3 million on one child if they'll still end up in a deaf school? Okay. So we need to come out and say, yes, if we spend this much money on this kid, he's able to go back to the regular school, and then we don't have to spend any more monies on their special education. So how can we as professionals then change our attitude towards deafness and say, indeed children with deaf, who are born deaf, can learn to listen and speak and go back to the regular schools? Are we getting convinced that it can work, or it only works in diaspora and not here? So we need to tell people that even here, with the little resources we have, children can listen and speak and be independent. Thank you.
What an amazing way to sum up the last 2 hours. Thank you. And that's 100% true. And when I started teaching, when I would find out the doctors that the kids went to that said you can't be tested, I would go back in there with a pamphlet. It starts with maybe your job as ambassadors is going back, making sure you reach out to the Ministry of Health, all the doctors where your children go to get their immunization, wherever they go, that they all know you can test hearing at any age. And you can start early, and that listening and spoken language is an option. Again, even today, when I tell people what I do, they ask me, do I sign? The general, it's so important to us because we work in this field, but outside the field, pediatric hearing loss is still a very small part of the population, and people just aren't aware. So you're absolutely right. This group, you're the ambassadors. And this presentation I showed of Noah, his mom prepared for a presentation she did at the university when she was getting her teacher of the deaf training. And what the teacher at the time of the program said to her was, your child's an anomaly. That's not typical. And I beg to differ. I've been around long enough to know that when all the pieces are in place, when you get started early, when you have good technology, when you have access to services, when you have the parents that have the children wearing it during all waking hours, when everything is in place, that is possible. So that is our future. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a nice lunch.